No one remembered who opened the rift. Some said it was an experiment gone wrong, an attempt to pierce the edge of reality and harvest energy from the nothing beyond. Others whispered it had always been there, waiting, patient, watching, until something finally noticed it back. What everyone agreed on was the moment the stars began to bleed. It started at the edge of known space, in a mining system so unimportant it didn't even have a proper name, just a string of numbers and fading coordinates in the archives of the Galactic Union. A routine transmission came in from the colony orbiting a dead gas giant. At first, it sounded like interference. Static. Distortion. A low hum that seemed to vibrate beneath the signal rather than within it. Then the screaming began. Not panic screams. Not cries for help. Something worse. The kind of screaming that came from throats that no longer understood what a scream was supposed to be. The transmission cut abruptly. When a patrol ship arrived, they found the station intact. No damage. No signs of battle. No depressurization. Just silence. And bodies. Hundreds of them. Every colonist lay where they had fallen, eyes wide open, faces twisted, not in fear, but in something deeper. Something that suggested they had seen too much. Understood too much. Their skin had darkened in strange patterns, veins branching like cracks across their bodies, as if something inside them had tried to escape and failed. The patrol crew lasted 6 minutes. Their final log didn't describe an attack. It described a presence. "It's not outside the ship," the captain whispered, voice shaking. "It's inside the signals. Inside the light. It's..." The recording warped. The audio folded in on itself. And then, silence. That was the first incident. It wasn't the last. Across the outer colonies, reports began flooding in. Ships vanishing mid-transit. Planets going dark without warning. Entire systems falling silent as if erased from existence. The Galactic Union responded with force. They always did. Fleets were dispatched. Quarantine zones established. Entire regions of space were sealed off. At first, they believed it was a new form of biological threat. A parasite, perhaps. Something that infected neural pathways, causing hallucinations, madness, eventual death. But parasites didn't erase star systems. Parasites didn't make physics forget. The first confirmed encounter changed everything. A Union dreadnought, armed with enough firepower to crack continents, entered a restricted sector to investigate a dead world. They never made it to orbit. Long-range sensors captured the moment before the feed collapsed. Space folded. Not visually. Not in a way that could be seen. But in a way that could be felt. Coordinates lost meaning. Distance became irrelevant. The dreadnought appeared to stretch across impossible angles, its structure bending in ways that should have torn it apart. And then it wasn't a ship anymore. It was something else. Something wrong. From that moment on, they had a name for it. Void spawn. They weren't life forms. They weren't machines. They were intrusions. Things that existed where existence wasn't supposed to be. Witness reports, those few who survived long enough to speak, described them in contradictions. Creatures with too many limbs, and not enough. Shapes that shifted when observed directly. Eyes that appeared where there should have been none, and disappeared when focused on. But the most terrifying detail wasn't how they looked. It was what they did. They didn't attack. They didn't invade. They didn't conquer. They made. Ships didn't explode. They forgot how to stay together. Weapons didn't fail. They ceased to have ever been functional. Soldiers didn't die. They unraveled, their bodies collapsing into something that no longer obeyed time. Entire planets went dark not because they were destroyed, but because something had removed their place in reality. Panic spread faster than the void ever could. Emergency protocols were enacted across every Union system. Borders were sealed. Travel was restricted. Entire species began evacuating toward the galactic core, abandoning colonies that had taken centuries to build. And still, the void spawn advanced. Not quickly. Not chaotically. But with a slow, inevitable certainty. As if they already knew the outcome. As if they were simply arriving. Then the signals began. At first, They were dismissed as background noise, residual interference from collapsing systems. But analysts soon realized something impossible. The signals weren't random. They were structured, rhythmic, intentional, and they weren't being broadcast outward. They were being directed inward, into minds, into thoughts, into the fragile space between perception and understanding. Those exposed to the signals reported the same thing. Whispers, not heard through ears, but inside the skull, behind the eyes, woven into the fabric of thought itself. No one could translate them, but everyone understood one thing. They were not warnings. They were not threats. They were not even communication in the way the Union understood it. They were a call. And then, for the first time since the void spawn appeared, their path changed. The slow, inevitable spread of their presence shifted direction. Not toward the densely populated core worlds. Not toward the strongest defenses. But toward something else. A system so small, so isolated, it barely registered in Union priority logs. A yellow star. 8 planets. 1 inhabited. Designation, Sol 3. Humanity. The Union High Council convened in emergency session. Projections were run. Outcomes calculated. There were no favorable scenarios. The final directive was issued across all channels. All vessels are to avoid the Sol system. Do not initiate contact. Do not attempt rescue operations. A pause followed. Then, a final line, one that would be remembered long after everything else was forgotten. This species will not survive contact. But on Earth, something strange was already happening. Long before the void arrived, people had started hearing the whispers. And unlike every other species in the galaxy, humanity was listening. The first reports from Earth didn't alarm the Galactic Union. At least, not at first. Compared to entire systems vanishing into impossible silence, humanity's symptoms seemed insignificant. Isolated cases of insomnia, vivid dreams, auditory hallucinations, a mild psychological disturbance spreading across a species already known for its emotional instability. The Union categorized it as pre-contact stress. They were wrong. It began quietly. A woman in a coastal city woke in the middle of the night, her heart racing, not from fear, but from recognition. She walked to her window and stared out at the ocean, her lips moving as if repeating something she had just been told. When questioned later, she couldn't remember the words. Only that they had felt true. Thousands of kilometers away, a deep space observatory technician froze mid-scan. His instruments had picked up something beyond the edge of measurable space, a fluctuation that shouldn't exist. He leaned closer to the screen and smiled, not because he understood what he was seeing, but because something in him did. Across continents, across cultures, across languages, humans began experiencing the same thing. Not fear, not pain, recognition. The dreams came next. At first, they were dismissed as coincidence. Shared archetypes, perhaps. The product of a globally connected species feeding off the same fears. But these dreams were too consistent, too detailed, too precise. People described vast, black oceans stretching beyond the horizon, filled with shapes that moved like thoughts rather than matter. Skies that folded in on themselves, revealing layers of reality stacked like broken glass. Creatures that didn't chase or attack, but observed, their attention pressing down like weight on the soul. And always, in the distance, something calling, not with words, but with meaning. Children began drawing symbols no linguist could decipher, geometric patterns that seemed to hurt the eyes when studied too long. Scientists who analyzed them reported migraines, nosebleeds, and an overwhelming sense that they were looking at something not meant to be seen. Still, the Union hesitated. Humanity had always been strange. Adaptive to the point of unpredictability. Resilient beyond reason. A species that thrived in chaos, that turned suffering into strength, that survived conditions that should have wiped them out long ago. If any species could endure the early stages of void exposure, it would be them. Then came the first undeniable anomaly. A soldier, injured during a routine training exercise, was pronounced clinically dead for 3 minutes and 17 seconds. No brain activity, no heartbeat, no signs of recovery. And then, he sat up, gasping, alive. Medical scans revealed something impossible. His body hadn't healed. It had adjusted. Damaged tissues had restructured themselves in ways that defied biological logic. Neural pathways had shifted, rerouted, forming patterns that didn't match any known human anatomy. When asked what he had experienced during death, he didn't describe darkness. He didn't describe nothingness. He described depth. It wasn't empty, he said, voice distant. It was waiting. The Union escalated the situation immediately. Quarantine protocols were enacted around the Sol system. No ships in. No ships out. Long-range observation only. Official classification changed from psychological anomaly to unknown cognitive contagion. Behind closed doors, they used a different term. Infection. But the word didn't fit. Infections spread by consuming the host. Was changing it. On Earth, the phenomenon accelerated. People began to anticipate things. A researcher predicted the exact moment a satellite would fail, down to the second, without access to its diagnostics. A child described a star system no one had ever recorded, until deep space probes confirmed its existence weeks later. A blind man began describing colors no human language could define. And those who listened to them, really listened, felt something stir at the edge of their thoughts. Something familiar. Something vast. Something close. Panic began to spread, not among humans but among the Union. Because humanity wasn't collapsing under the influence of the void. They weren't losing their minds. They were expanding them. Where other species experienced madness, humans found patterns. Where others broke, humans adapted. And where others heard noise, humans heard meaning. Emergency discussions erupted across Union leadership. They are being compromised. We must sterilize the system before it spreads. If this reaches the core worlds. But no decision was made. Because even as they debated, something else was happening. The signals changed. They grew stronger, clearer, not louder, but more focused. As if whatever lay beyond the rift had adjusted its approach, refined its message, targeted it, toward one species, toward one world, toward minds that did not reject it, but welcomed it. On Earth, the whispers were no longer confined to dreams. People heard them while awake, in crowded cities, in quiet rooms, in the space between breaths, not constant, not overwhelming, just enough. Just enough to be noticed. Just enough to be followed. Some resisted. Many didn't. Because the whispers didn't demand anything. They didn't threaten. They didn't promise. They simply invited. And humans, by nature, had always been curious. Always been drawn to the unknown. Always been willing to step forward when others stepped back. The first group disappeared 3 days after the signals intensified. No signs of struggle. No evidence of coercion, just empty homes, abandoned vehicles, personal belongings left behind as if their owners had simply walked away. Surveillance footage showed them moving with calm, deliberate purpose, heading toward remote locations. Deserts, mountains, open oceans, places where the skies stretched wide, places where nothing stood between them and whatever was waiting beyond. The Union intercepted one final transmission from Earth before all outbound communication ceased. A scientist, one of humanity's brightest minds. Her voice was steady, peaceful, almost relieved. "It's not what we thought," she said. The pause. In the background, something shifted, subtle, wrong, like reality adjusting itself. "It's not an invasion." Another pause. Then softly, "It's a conversation." The feed cut, and in the silence that followed, for the first time since the void spawn appeared, the Galactic Union felt something they had not yet experienced. Not confusion, not fear, but something far worse. Uncertainty. Because if the void wasn't consuming humanity, then what exactly was humanity becoming? By the time the void spawn reached the edge of the Sol system, The rest of the galaxy had already written humanity off as lost. Another species consumed. Another world erased. Another warning ignored too late. The Galactic Union established a distant observation perimeter, far enough to avoid contamination, close enough to witness the end. Automated probes lined the boundary, relaying visual and sensory data back to Union Command. What they saw did not make sense. The void spawn did not arrive like a fleet. They unfolded. Space near the outer planets distorted, not violently, not explosively, but incorrectly. Stars stretched into thin lines, then snapped back. Darkness pooled where there should have been light, forming shapes that refused to stay consistent. And from those distortions, they emerged. Massive, shifting, indescribable. Creatures that were not bound by direction or dimension. Some appeared as vast silhouettes blotting out starlight, their edges fraying into nothingness. Others were smaller, closer to what the Union might have called forms, but even those flickered between states, as if they existed in multiple versions of themselves at once. The probes struggled to process what they were seeing. Several shut down instantly. Others continued transmitting, but their data contradicted itself, recording shapes that could not exist, movements that defied causality. And yet, there was no attack. The void spawn did not rush inward. They did not descend upon Earth. It slowed. For the first time since their emergence, their advance lost its certainty. It wasn't hesitation as the Union understood it. It was something deeper, something instinctive, as if they had reached a boundary they had not expected. On Earth, the change was already complete. Cities still stood. Oceans still moved. The planet itself appeared untouched. But humanity was no longer behaving like a species under threat. There was no global panic. No mass hysteria. No desperate attempts to flee a danger that had already devoured civilizations far stronger than theirs. Instead, there was movement. Deliberate. Coordinated. Millions of people leaving their homes, their cities, their lives behind. Walking. Always walking. Toward open spaces. Deserts stretched with silent figures moving across dunes that shimmered under an unfamiliar sky. Mountain peaks, once isolated and empty, became gathering points for thousands who stood at their summits, staring upward. Along coastlines, entire populations waded into the water, not drowning, not struggling, just standing there, waves crashing against them as they looked out toward the horizon. Watching. Waiting. The Union observed all of it with growing unease. They are gathering, one analyst reported. For what? Another demanded. No one had an answer. The first descent. A void spawn entity broke from the outer distortion and moved inward. It didn't travel. It was there. One moment it existed beyond Saturn's orbit. The next, it loomed above Earth. The probes captured its form, or tried to. A vast shape, like a shadow cast from a direction that didn't exist. Limbs, or extensions, unfolded into space, each one bending at angles that hurt to perceive. Its surface wasn't solid, but layered, like overlapping realities struggling to occupy the same place. And at its center, something like an eye. Not a physical structure, but a point of focus, attention, awareness. It turned toward Earth, and the world did not react. No defensive measures, no transmissions, no signs of fear. Stillness. Across the planet, every human who had gathered in those open spaces lifted their heads in unison and looked back. The Union's monitoring systems faltered, not from damage, from overload, because for a brief, impossible moment, the data suggested something that should not have been possible. The white switches, not physically, conceptually. Its presence wavered as if encountering resistance not from force, but from meaning. On Earth, a single figure stepped forward. A human. No suit. No protection. No weapon. Just a man, standing alone in a vast desert, his shadow stretching unnaturally beneath a sky that no longer behaved correctly. The void spawn focused on him, and the man felt. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't bravery. It was recognition. The creature moved. Or perhaps it reached. A tendril, if it could be called that, extended toward the human, slicing through layers of reality as it approached. The Union prepared for the worst. They had seen this before. This was the moment of contact. The moment everything ended. The tendril stopped inches from the man's face. And remained there, motionless. The silence that followed rippled across every monitoring station, every command center, every mind watching from afar. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Nothing happened. No destruction. No unraveling. No erasure. Stillness. And then, something changed. The tendril did not strike. It withdrew. Slowly. Deliberately. As if reconsidering. As if understanding. The human tilted his head slightly, as though listening to something no one else could hear. Then he spoke. No microphones captured the words. No transmission carried the sound. But every system, every sensor, every observer across the Union recorded the same anomaly. A fluctuation. A pattern. A translation that bypassed language entirely and embedded itself directly into cognition. A single concept. A single realization. You are not unknown to us. The void spawn reacted. Not violently. Not aggressively. But unmistakably. Its form shifted, collapsing inward, then expanding again in a way that suggested something the Union had never attributed to these entities before. Recognition. Across Earth, the gathered humans moved as one. Not toward the creatures. Not away from them. But in alignment. Their bodies adjusting subtly, their posture shifting, their presence synchronizing with something beyond physical reality. And the void spawn, the things that had erased civilizations without hesitation, did something unprecedented. They did not attack. They did not consume. They did not advance. But waited. At the edge of Earth. Watching. As if standing before something they had not expected to find. As if encountering something that did not belong among the prey of the universe, but among its equals. Or something far worse. Back in Union Command, silence gripped the chamber. No one spoke. No one moved. Because the implication was unavoidable. The void spawn had not come to destroy humanity. To meet it. The decision was not unanimous. But it was inevitable. Deep within the fortified chambers of the Galactic Union High Command, fear had already taken root, and fear, when paired with power, rarely waited for certainty. They had watched entire civilizations erased. They had seen physics unravel, fleets vanish, reality itself bend under the presence of the void spawn. And now, they were watching humanity stand beside it. Not destroyed. Not resisting. But aligning. To the Union, there was only one conclusion. Humanity is compromised. The order was issued within the hour. Operation Final Silence. If the void could not be stopped, then it would be contained. And if humanity had become its bridge into the galaxy, then humanity would be erased. The fleet that gathered at the edge of Sol was the largest in recorded history. Warships stretched across space in layered formations, dreadnoughts, carrier arrays, antimatter lances, reality-anchored artillery designed specifically to counter the distortions caused by the void spawn. Entire suns had been dimmed to power this armada. This was not a battle fleet. This was an execution. And yet, as they approached the boundary of the system, something felt wrong. It wasn't the void spawn. Those entities still lingered at the edges, vast and watchful, their forms shifting slowly in the dark between planets. They did not react to the incoming fleet. They did not defend Earth. They simply observed, as if waiting for something else to unfold. Final approach, the fleet commander announced, her voice steady despite the unease creeping through every sensor feed. Target, Sol 3. Begin firing sequence. Weapons powered. Energy built. Reality itself seemed to brace under the strain of what was about to be unleashed. And then, the targeting systems failed. Not catastrophically. Not violently. They simply lost meaning. Coordinates scrambled, not into chaos, but into something incomprehensible. Distance no longer aligned. Angles refused to stabilize. Ships appeared both closer and farther than they were, existing in contradictory positions simultaneously. Recalibrate, the commander snapped. Recalibration impossible, the systems replied. Space is inconsistent. A ripple passed through the fleet. Not a physical wave. Something deeper. A distortion that didn't move through space, but through understanding. And then, without warning, they appeared. Not ships. Not weapons. Humans. At first, the sensors refused to accept what they were seeing. Dozens of figures, then hundreds, materializing in the vacuum between the fleet and Earth. No suits. No propulsion. No protection. Just human forms, suspended in space as if the laws that governed reality no longer applied to them. Their bodies looked mostly unchanged. But something was different. Subtle. Wrong. Their outlines blurred at the edges, as though they were not fully anchored in a single version of themselves. Their eyes reflected light that did not exist, depths that stretched far beyond physical form. And when they moved, space moved with them. Identify yourselves, the commander demanded, forcing authority into her voice. No response. Not through comms. Not through signal. But every mind aboard every ship received the same thing. Not words. A presence. A thought that did not feel like their own. You came to end us. The commander gritted her teeth. Fire. The fleet obeyed. Or tried to. Weapons discharged, streams of energy, antimatter bursts, reality-tearing projectiles designed to obliterate anything they touched. They never reached their targets. Because distance ceased to exist. The attacks stretched, warped, then folded back on themselves, vanishing into angles that had no direction, dissipating into nothing as if they had never been fired at all. Impossible, someone whispered. No, the commander said quietly, her voice trembling now. Not impossible. Just irrelevant. The humans drifted closer. Not advancing. Just arriving. Their presence grew heavier, pressing against perception itself. Crew members across the fleet clutched their heads, not from pain, but from the overwhelming sensation of being seen. Not physically. Completely. Every thought. Every memory. Every fear. Laid bare. And the humans observed it all. One of them stepped forward. A woman. Her form flickered slightly, overlapping with something vast and indescribable, like a shadow of something much larger trying to fit into a human shape. She raised her hand. Not in threat. Not in defense. Just a gesture. And the fleet stopped. Every ship froze in place. Engines died. Weapons powered down. Not by force, but by absence. The systems did not fail. They simply forgot how to function. Panic spread. Commands were shouted. Manual overrides attempted. Nothing responded, because nothing existed in a way that allowed it to. The woman spoke. Again, not through sound, but directly into the minds of every being present. You fear the void because it breaks you. Images followed. Worlds collapsing. Civilizations erased. The endless, incomprehensible hunger of the void spawn tearing through reality without resistance. A shift. Humanity. Standing. Changing. Becoming. We did not break. The void spawn appeared behind them, vast, silent, waiting. Not looming. Not threatening. Present. As if part of the same existence. We listened. Another shift. The whispers. The dreams. The call. We answered. The commander felt it then. Not fear. Not exactly. Something deeper. A realization forming at the edge of comprehension. You're not controlled, she whispered. The woman's expression didn't change. But something behind her eyes did. No. The pause. We are not controlled. Another pause. Longer this time. Heavier. We are no longer separate. The fleet understood. Too late. This was not an infection. Not a corruption. Not an invasion. This was a merger. A union of something ancient and incomprehensible with something equally unpredictable and unbreakable. The void had not consumed humanity. Humanity had not defeated the void. They had become something else. Something new. Something the galaxy had never prepared for. The woman lowered her hand. The fleet remained frozen. Helpless. Insignificant. Leave, the humans said. Not a threat. Not a command. A statement of inevitability. Or stay. The pause. And then, it makes no difference. One by one, the ships began to power down completely. Not destroyed. Not attacked. Just ended. Their systems fading into silence as if they had never existed at all. The commander watched the stars shift around her, her understanding unraveling with them. This wasn't war. There had been no battle. No resistance. No victory. Because there had never been a chance to fight. As the last transmission from the fleet reached Union space, it carried no tactical data. No warnings. No strategies. Only a single, fragmented realization. We did not come to fight a species. The pause. Then barely audible. We came too late to stop what they became. The galaxy did not witness the end. There was no explosion. No final battle. No desperate last stand recorded in the archives of the Galactic Union. Because nothing ended. It simply became something else. The Sol system still existed. From a distance, it appeared unchanged. A stable star, orbiting planets. The faint signatures of what should have been a thriving civilization. Automated probes sent to observe it reported normal gravitational patterns, consistent orbital mechanics, no signs of catastrophic destruction. And yet, no probe that entered the system ever returned. Not destroyed. Not disabled. Just gone. As if crossing an invisible threshold where observation itself was no longer allowed. The Union declared the system forbidden. A permanent exclusion zone was established, far beyond the outermost reach of the void spawn, far beyond even long-range sensor capability. No ship was permitted to approach. No signal was allowed to pass through. Official records labeled Sol 3 as non-existent for all operational purposes. But unofficially, everyone knew. They had not lost Earth. They had lost access to it. The void spawn did not disappear. They spread, but differently now. Where once they moved with silent, inevitable consumption, erasing everything in their path, they now paused. Observed. Redirected. Entire sectors once marked for annihilation were bypassed without explanation. Systems on the brink of collapse found the void simply passing them by, as if guided by something unseen. As if following a will. Union analysts struggled to map the new patterns. There was logic, but not one they could understand. Until the first confirmed sighting. A border outpost, positioned at the very edge of known space, detected a void spawn entity drifting toward an inhabited world. Panic spread instantly. Evacuation protocols were initiated. Defense systems activated. The outpost prepared for annihilation. They had seen this before. They knew how it ended. But this time, something else arrived first. It appeared without warning. No warp signature. No spatial distortion. No detectable approach. One moment, the space between the outpost and the void spawn was empty. Then a single figure stood there. Human. At least in shape. The station sensors struggled to lock onto it. Its form flickered, existing in overlapping states. Solid and not, present and distant, singular and infinite. Light bent around it, not as if refracted, but as if unsure how to behave in its presence. And behind it, for just a moment, something vast moved. Not separate, not following, but connected. Like a shadow cast by something that did not belong to any one direction. The void spawn stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Its form contracted slightly, its shifting mass pulling inward as if responding to something familiar. Recognizing something. The human raised its head. And the entire outpost felt it. Not a signal. Not a transmission. A pressure. A presence pressing against the boundaries of thought, slipping into awareness without permission. A single concept formed in every mind. Not this one. The void spawn responded instantly. It turned. Not in confusion. Not in hesitation. But in obedience. Its form unraveled slightly as it shifted direction, folding back into the dark between stars, leaving the system untouched. Alive. Silence filled the outpost. No one moved. No one spoke. Because they all understood what they had just witnessed. The void spawn had not been stopped. It had been told. The human remained for a moment longer, floating in the void, motionless. Watching. Not the outpost. Not the planet behind it. But everything. The technician, trembling, activated a recording device. "Identify yourself," he whispered. The figure didn't turn. Didn't react. But the answer came anyway. Not through sound. Through understanding. "We are what you feared." The pause. "And what feared you?" The technician's breath caught. "Humanity?" he asked, barely able to form the word. The figure shifted. Just slightly. And for a fraction of a second, he saw it. Not a person. Not entirely. Something layered. Something vast. Something that stretched far beyond the boundaries of the body it wore. Something that felt endless. Humanity was the beginning. The figure turned then. Not physically, but in a way that made the entire outpost feel as though it had been brought into focus. So, measured. Understood. Now. The pause. Long enough for fear to take root. For realization to settle. For the truth to become unavoidable. "We are the end." And then, it was gone. No flash. No movement. No trace. Just absence. In the cycles that followed, more sightings were reported. Human figures appearing at the edges of void activity. Intervening. Redirecting. Watching. Always watching. The Union updated its directive. Not once. Not twice. But continuously, as understanding slowly gave way to something far more fragile. Acceptance. The final version of the directive was simple, absolute, and universally obeyed. Do not approach human-controlled space. Do not engage void entities. Do not respond to signals or whispers. A final note was added. Not official. Not sanctioned. But preserved in every version of the document that followed. A warning passed quietly between commanders, analysts, and survivors. If you hear them, the pause. They are not calling anymore. Another pause. Longer this time. Heavier. They are. The text ended abruptly. Corrupted. Or perhaps intentionally left unfinished. Because no one who heard the whispers anymore ever returned to explain them. And far beyond the reach of the Union, beyond mapped space, beyond the last places where reality still behaved as expected, something moved. Not hunting. Not consuming. Not spreading. Watching. Waiting. And in the endless dark between stars, where the void once ruled alone, something new had taken its place. Not beasts. Not gods. Not invaders. Something far worse. Humanity.